In July of 1518, a woman identified only as Frau Trophäa began dancing uncontrollably in the streets of Strasbourg, Germany. At first, it was just her, but soon others joined in. Over the next month, more than 400 people were overcome with an uncontrollable urge to dance, some for as long as 6 weeks. The dancing continued despite injuries and exhaustion, often ending only when the dancers collapsed from exhaustion or died. Even though we have no idea what caused this outbreak of Dancing Mania, we do know that it wasn't unique to 1518. Similar events had taken place before and after, leaving historians to wonder if these outbreaks were all related or if they were all simply the results of different phenomena. What we do know is that these outbreaks can tell us something about how people thought about the body in the 16th century and how they dealt with those whose bodies did not behave as expected. I'm the host, and you're watching this channel. Join me today as we look at a few cases of Dancing Mania, starting with that one in 1518. Our story begins in July of 1518 when Frau Trophäa was driven to dance by an unknown force. We don't know much about her, but we do know that she was a 23-year-old peasant who lived outside of Strasbourg. At the time, Strasbourg was a free imperial city, which is a fancy way of saying that it was a German city that was independent from the Holy Roman Empire. It was also famous for its vibrant cultural scene. In the summer of 1518, the city was hosting a festival to celebrate the marriage between Francis I, Duke of Saxony, and the widowed Queen Isabella of Hungary. On July 14th, Trophy was at the festival with a friend when she began to dance erratically. She danced around her friend in circles and even tried to join a group of musicians, which led them to stop playing so that she could dance over their music. As the days passed, her dancing became more intense and eventually she was unable to stop. According to contemporary reports, she would jump and leap like a wild woman and sometimes throw herself onto the ground. She couldn't speak, and she didn't eat or sleep. Her face was distorted and she had foam coming out of her mouth. She danced until she fell to the ground exhausted and had to be carried home by her friends. At first, she tried to explain that she had been possessed by the devil. However, given her good reputation in the community, people did not believe her. Instead, they believed that she had been bewitched by a rival or that she was trying to use witchcraft to avoid her taxes. And so, to prove her innocence, Trophäa went to church and danced in front of the altar. But after the service, instead of returning home, she went back to dancing in the streets where she was joined by another woman named Frau Ott. Unlike Trophäa, Ott was an impoverished beggar who had a reputation for being a little odd. She had no problem admitting that the devil had possessed her. And as she danced with Trophäa, she encouraged her to give in to the devil and accept her fate. Soon the two women were joined by a third dancer, and then a fourth, and then many more. As the outbreak grew, people began to panic. Some blamed the recent feast, thinking that they had all eaten something poisonous. Others blamed the heat, thinking that it had driven them mad. And still others believed that it was the work of witches. As people searched for an explanation, the dancing continued. For 6 weeks, the dancers performed day and night. They were too exhausted to return home, so they slept in the streets, sometimes huddling together for warmth and sometimes sheltering under trees. People would bring them water and food, and they would eat while dancing. Some ate so much that they sickened and vomited, and still they continued to dance. Some of the dancers fell gravely ill. A man named Ludwig, who had been dancing for 3 weeks, became delirious and cried out that he wanted to kill the devil inside of him. He died on August 16th, and over the next few days, several more dancers died. On September, Trophäa collapsed and died after dancing for 44 days straight. By that point, the other dancers had also fallen ill and most of them died over the next few weeks. Only a few survived, and all of them were permanently injured. Some were left deaf, and others suffered from epilepsy. One woman, Frau Isken, was left paralyzed from the waist down. Although this outbreak ended after 3 months, it wasn't the last time something like this happened. In 1624, there was a similar outbreak in Italy where dozens of people danced for weeks until they died. In 1675, an outbreak in France affected nearly 1,000 people. And in 1680, there was another outbreak in Germany, this time in the city of Aachen. Luckily, a local doctor named Johann Weyer documented the event. His report gives us our best description of what happened. Like the dancers in Strasbourg, the people in Aachen came down with an inexplicable urge to dance. The dancing was violent and uncontrollable, and it seemed to affect the victims both day and night. It made them weak and hungry, but they couldn't stop. Even when they collapsed from exhaustion, they still danced. They had to be carried back to their beds. Sometimes the dancing would stop, but then it would start up again, sometimes in the middle of the night. Most of the victims were young women, and they danced in groups, holding each other's hands and singing songs. Although some of the victims initially confessed to practicing witchcraft, Weir concluded that it was not the work of the devil, but rather a medical condition. He suggested that the dancing might be caused by an imbalance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow, and black bile. While Weir's theory made sense to a modern audience, it made no sense to his contemporaries. At the time, it was generally believed that illness resulted from an imbalance in the person's soul, not their body. And so Weir was criticized for his views. But despite the criticism, his ideas were remarkably progressive for the time period. After all, he was essentially arguing that dancing mania was a mental illness. Sadly, his contemporaries never found a better explanation because there is no single explanation that can account for all of the different outbreaks. And because they occurred so long ago, we can only speculate about the causes. To learn more about some potential causes, let's fast forward to the present day. Today, we know that there are several conditions that can cause uncontrollable dancing, including neurological disorders, psychiatric illnesses, and drug-induced dyskinesias. Neurological disorders like Sydenham's chorea can result from an autoimmune reaction caused by strep bacteria. Psychiatric illnesses like Gilles de la Tourette syndrome can also lead to involuntary movements. And certain drugs used to treat mental illness can cause a condition known as tardive dyskinesia, which results in repetitive involuntary movements. It's possible that similar disorders could have caused the outbreaks in the 16th century. After all, there were reports that some of the dancers were mentally ill. It's also possible that an undiagnosed infectious disease could have been responsible, since many of the victims died, and some of the surviving victims suffered permanent physical damage. In fact, there is evidence that an ergotism epidemic played a role in the 1518 outbreak. Ergotism is a disease caused by a fungus that grows on rye. The fungus produces a toxin called ergot, which can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and gangrene. It's possible that someone ate some rye bread contaminated with ergot, which led to the outbreak. But if that's true, it doesn't explain why the outbreak happened again and again in different places. And unfortunately, we may never know exactly what caused these outbreaks. What we can say is that these events are an important part of the history of medicine. They show us how people thought about the body in the 16th century and how they dealt with those whose bodies did not behave as expected. They also show us how far medical science has come in the past 500 years. Thanks to modern science, we now know that uncontrollable dancing is a symptom of a medical condition, not a sign of demonic possession. So what should we make of these outbreaks? Are they a mystery that will never be solved? Or can we find a rational explanation for them? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave me a review on iTunes. I'll see you next time.